Hello again. I will confess at once that I'm not a huge fan of the United Nations for many reasons. The idea of signing over any part of this country's autonomy to them fills me instinctively with dread. The UN is always coming up with plans for things like immigration, the best way to run society, and so on. I am old-fashioned enough to want my own country to decide such things rather than a bunch of foreign bureaucrats. We had rather enough of that sort of thing before we left the common market. I was not all that keen on the way that the World Health Organization handled things during the last pandemic either, and the idea of granting them the authority to boss Britain about and tell us how to handle things in the event of another pandemic does not appeal to me. I think most viewers will be aware that there is a thing called the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, which the UN are heavily pushing, and the World Health Organization are urging every nation on earth to sign. It's due to be ratified this month, and all the signs are that we are going to sign it. If we ratify this treaty, as is planned in the next week or two, then we shall be legally obliged to abide by it. Among other things, this would mean being required to hand over 20% of all our vaccines if there was another pandemic, so that the United Nations could decide where they are used rather than us. This sounds like a bad deal for Britain. The World Health Organization could also set out plans for things like lockdowns and start instructing countries what steps they should be taking to deal with the pandemic. Alarm bells start clanging in my ears when I read the draft of this treaty, to which I give a link in the description to this video together with a couple of news items on the subject. To speak plainly, I was not overly enthusiastic about some of the guidelines which the World Health Organization was issuing 3 or 4 years ago, and we in this country were free either to follow or disregard them as we felt was best. I'm really not sure that being bound by a treaty to obey every diktat of the United Nations at some future date, if there were to be a pandemic, strikes me as a brilliant idea. There's a little too much following the United Nations already for my liking, and some of the plans which they subscribe to do not seem to me to be in our national interest, to say the very least of it.